Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host, and today we're pleased to welcome Andrew Boden. Andrew, welcome back to Talking Kootenay Books. You were our guest previously, and at that point in time we were talking about your book. It was The Secret History of Cranbrook. I believe you called it a counterfactual novel. Is that correct?
That's right. The Secret History of my hometown was what I called counterfactual history. So it was a series of stories where I reimagined Cranbrook's past and had, shall we say, guest stars such as Leon Trotsky and Mark Twain and so on make appearances in Cranbrook's history.
Right. It was a fun book to read. I enjoyed it. When we were doing that interview, you alluded to the fact that you were working on another book. And because I'd ask you, what's your future plans? And I guess we're pleased to announce that the new book is out. And just tell us about the new book and how it came about.
So the new book is very different from the previous collection. It's short stories. This one is nowhere near as zany or lighthearted. It deals with a very difficult topic in the 20th century. So that was 1940 in Germany. It is about a little known aspect of the Holocaust in which people with mental and physical disabilities were persecuted by the Nazi regime.
Okay, so the title of the book, When We Were Ashes.
When We Were Ashes.
Okay,
yeah.
So it was a stark contrast between your first book, and I'm just curious as to what motivated you to make such a shift, and what sort of fascinated you about that story that made you sit down and want to write about it.
That's a very good question, and as I think about it, I realize why I wrote it was something I had to discover near the end of my writing it. So in about 2015, I read a book called The Third Reich at War. That was by a historian named Richard Evans. And Evans, of course, was covering all of the war from its start in the 30s to its bitter end. But he covered this program called Aktion T4, which was this program to persecute people with disabilities in Germany. And there was a couple of pages in the book. I read them. To be honest, I didn't know about this aspect of the Holocaust. It was kind of dark and disturbing, as you might imagine. I made notes on it, made notes in my journal, put it away, and didn't think about it until many years later. When I finished The Secret History of my hometown, I was literally sitting in my home office. I asked myself out loud, well, what's next? And an image from the Evans book came to mind, and that was of a gray bus that would pick up children and others with disabilities and take them to what were called euthanasia centers. They were not called that,
but that was their purpose.
But that was their purpose, right. And for whatever reason, I agreed to write this book, and then began a process of about 6 months of historical research.
Right. So it must have been fascinating to delve into that. And of course, like you said, it's a dark part of history, and the horrors that are exposed through that are somewhat disturbing. How did you all work that into a novel, make it readable, and without maybe crossing the line and going into the horrific side of it? How did you find that balance?
So I'm a very intuitive writer, and by that I mean I can't for the life of me outline one of my books. Every time I sort of make a map of what I think is going to be the territory, it turns out not to be the territory. So I did.
Shows you where not to go.
Shows me where not to go, exactly. So I worked on the research for about 6 months. That included a number of first-hand accounts of life in Germany during the Third Reich that included some other authors who were persecuted. While they were not disabled, it gave me a sense of the difficulties and the horrors they were facing. And then I began researching my characters, and I found after that research had been done, the book just started to flow. I wrote it very quickly. It was during the pandemic, and had more time, as many of us did, and it just flowed. And what was strange to me now, looking back, is that I almost felt as if I wrote in like a dissociated state or something, because I didn't really feel how horrific this chapter or this chapter in my writing life was until I stood back and I'm done and I realized how difficult it was. But one thing I wanted to emphasize in this book was, though this is a very dark time, there is still beauty and love and tenderness and humanity even in these dark moments. So one example of that is there's a lot of music in this.
So your main character, Rainer, is it?
Yeah.
Had a musical experience, and so maybe just elaborate a little bit about that and how that affected the development of your book.
So Rainer, at the hospital where he was left by his father years prior to the novel beginning, there's a man there who comes. He's what we would call an orderly. He comes and changes sheets and cleans the ward and so on. And while he's doing this, he brings his gramophone and he listens to Eric Satie's Gymnopédies 1, 2, and 3. He plays that record over and over again while he's working with the children. And that piece or series of pieces becomes kind of an anthem for all the love and tenderness that the children are being shown by someone during these difficult times. And the children throughout the novel remember the music, they long to hear it again, and at one point Rainer even, in a bit of a magic realist moment, plays an invisible piano and the children begin hearing the Eric Satie piece.
So fascinating. So pretty complex subject matter. How do you have your initial research? How do you go from that initial research into building characters and developing it into a novel? How did that all go together?
For me, again, it's I'm an intuitive writer. I did the research. One thing I was able to get was pictures of children who were involved or persecuted in the Aktion T4 program. And so some of the pictures I just really spoke to me of the children's humanity and really gave me an idea of who some of my characters might be. And I usually find I know I've hit kind of a rich vein of a character when I start hearing their voice and they start speaking to me in a sense. And the rhythms and the sound of their voice really flows through me and into the written page.
Right. So Andrew, you grew up in Cranbrook, graduated from Mount Baker High School. You live in Burnaby, you've got a professional life. How does that writing fit into all that past knowledge, past experience, and your current occupation?
It's hard. I find to be a creative person, dare I call myself an artist, it's hard to carve out time and it's hard to carve out space because we have jobs and lives and bills to pay and so on. But I usually get up and hour before I go to work. I get up an hour early before I go to work. And that is sort of dedicated writing time. And then mornings on weekends and my days off I find are the most productive. I tend to be best in the morning. I find I'm more vulnerable and open, and that really lends itself to my writing.
So I've read that you actually had someone go through and read the book, sort of a sensitivity reader, I think the expression was that I read. How did that process work, and why did you think that was necessary?
So that was, so the book is published by Goose Lane Editions out of the Atlantic provinces here in Canada. Excellent publisher, and they treated me very well. But because I'm dealing with children who aren't represented so much in literature, so children with mental or physical disabilities, they hired a sensitivity reader to go through the manuscript and just ensured that I was representing them appropriately and with respect. While I would not say that my aim was to represent anyone that I don't think is my purview, it was to try and tell a story involving characters different from me.
Sure.
And I wanted to make sure, and my publisher wanted to make sure that I had done so respectfully. And the good news is, for the most part, they felt I had, and I just had to make a few tweaks.
Okay. Yeah. So it must be satisfying as a novelist to be able to do that, tell your story, and really bring out the humanity of your characters, and even in a difficult, a situation or time like that. So tell me, what appealed to you about that segment of history? Why would someone from Cranbrook write about the Holocaust?
Why would someone from Cranbrook write about the Holocaust? That's a good thing. I read broadly and have ever since I was young. My father was a big reader. I inherited a number of my father's books when he died in 1996. And he had books on World War II, he had books on different aspects of history. And for whatever reason, that story I found so compelling. I found it a period of history that had not been really fictionalized. And I think more than fictionalized, I wanted to bear witness to those events that hadn't been told in my own fiction, which is really the bulk of my writing.
Sure. So why do you think it's such an important story to tell?
I think we need to know where we've come from as a people, to realize the mistakes, or the deep and disturbing mistakes a society or a country or a people can make, and with a little bit of insight and hope, not repeat them.
Right. So that's sort of the benefit of history. It should teach us about the future.
I would hope we can heed the mistakes from our history, yes.
Okay. What has been the reaction to the book initially?
I'd say it's been very good. I got a good review in the BC Review, for example. Got a very kind review in the Cranbrook Townsman here. Numerous readers have contacted me and said how much, maybe enjoy is the wrong word, but how much it moved them and how much they were affected by the characters and the richness of the character stories.
You know how things sort of come and go as far as trends and so forth. So there was a trend towards many Holocaust experience stories, movies, that kind of thing. Do you see that playing into this trend, or do you see that your book as being sort of separate or maybe beyond what we're seeing in the general media?
I don't know if I've hit a trend. I rarely seek out to do that. I think I was just able to I was able to find a story that hadn't been told before.
Right.
A Jewish friend of mine from the U.S. did say that the worry for him and his friends and community was that the Holocaust is being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very pleased to see a book like mine that would tackle at least some aspect of it.
Right. You know, the Holocaust is such a sensitive issue and such a horrific issue. Our family had the opportunity some years ago to go through the Holocaust Museum. And, you know, it has a profound effect on you when you see how humans can actually treat other humans. And, you know, I just remember this one image as we walked through the museum of a room full of shoes. And those shoes represented the people that were sent off to be exterminated. And are there moments like that in your book?
There are. There's one scene where two of the children are taken to help with an emergency that's happened, a mechanical emergency that's happened, and they're asked to move wheelbarrows of ash. They don't know what this is. We, as 21st century people, are in the ironic position of knowing what's going on. The children don't. One of the children does not have boots, and it's deepest winter when this takes place. And one of the guards just points at a pile of boots that has been left behind. They're told a lie about why there are boots there, but that was one moment I did capture. There's just something haunting, very deeply haunting, and about those piles of clothing and
so much symbolism there that takes place.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you sit down and just, you know, you've done your research, you're coming up with the concept, you're developing your characters, and did you know how the book was going to end or how it was going to go together, or is it more of a process where it sort of flows as you go?
It's really a process of discovery for me. I always liken how I write to driving a dark road at night, and you can only see as far ahead as your headlights will allow you. And you have no real idea where you're going, but with some faith and trust in your research and your skills and your experience, you have an idea you might go somewhere very fruitful and moving. I didn't know when we were ashes, or how where we were ashes was going to end until maybe, you know, a day or two before I finished writing the first draft, and very fortunately ended in a powerful place. Sometimes that's just, I find, with how I write without an outline, more intuitively. Sometimes it's just sheer luck. I have a few manuscripts that have never got to the end, and I've hit a wall and not been able to go on.
Sure. So fascinating topic, fascinating book, and I'm just going to go back to, I think we sort of maybe talked about this a little bit already, but you know, that event was 70 years ago. Do you think we've learned any lessons from that kind of event, and do you think it is so important to keep reminding ourselves of the tragedies that, you know, sort of beset mankind, and do we see those repeating today? So.
I worry, and I worry because sometimes of what I see happening in the U.S. is troubling to me. So, for example, Donald Trump has a nephew, Frederick Trump III, I think is his name. He wrote a memoir on the Trump family. Subtitle, I think, was "The Trumps and How We got that way.
Right.
And Frederick Trump had a son with a major disability, and his uncle, who he had appealed to for additional help, had basically said that why are you bothering with your son? Like, you should just let him die. And it's very disturbing to hear that in the 21st century. Like, as you said, we're only 70 years out from this tragedy, this tragic horror I wrote about. And yet there are policymakers in the world who still have similar attitudes towards people with mental and physical disabilities. And while we've come a long way in our respect for people with disabilities, I think we have a long way to go yet, and I'm hoping we'll continue on that path.
Right. An important path, because
a very important path.
If no one speaks for the disadvantaged, who oftentimes they cannot speak for themselves. So,
well, and it's also not necessarily just us speaking for them, but them having opportunities to be heard and to have their experience in the world heard and understood and respected. Yeah.
Well, thank you for tackling that sort of sensitive, horrific, and difficult subject, and again, maybe adding to the education, because I have to say, I've read a lot, studied a lot about the Holocaust, and had not heard of that aspect of it before to any great extent. So, bringing that to light, I think, adds to the volume that people should know about. And
thank you.
And I hope we take the lesson seriously. Let's just switch gears a little bit. I know you're a busy guy, but you evidently have more projects on the go. Can you just talk a little bit about what other writing you're doing and what you anticipate in the future?
Well, I'm always writing. It just seems to be what I do, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it and to hopefully do it well. So I'm working on something a little lighter. I really wanted to tackle the history of 18th century exploration, naval exploration on the west coast of British Columbia. So you had the Russians, the Spanish, the British, and the fledgling U.S. Exploring Canada's west coast. So I'm focusing on a story around the time of the so-called Nootka crisis. It was on Nootka Island, and that was a skirmish, let's say, between the British and the Spanish. It's set around that time, and having a lot of fun with it.
Good. Yeah, that sounds like a great research project, and also fun to write about. That West Coast history is fascinating, for sure. That takes me back to, how do you come up with such diverse ideas? Any tips for other writers?
Any tips? I would just say, read widely and be open. And be open to these intuitive signals that come to one. And they're not necessarily verbal. There could be an image. Usually I know I'm on to the next story when a strong image comes to me, as it did with When We Were Ashes. But be open to those things. Be open to what you may be told by your imagination.
Right.
It could be an image, it could be a sound, it could be a piece of music, it could be a sensation. I find being alive to those things and giving them respect sort of fuels my own creativity.
Right. So I just want you to talk a little bit about the promotion of your book and so forth. Andrew, I know that it's one thing to sit down, write, produce a book, get your publisher to get it out there. What kind of things do you do to support the book after it's been published?
Well, that's probably the most difficult part for me because I'm more on the introverted side, and the business of writing doesn't come to me naturally. But I am doing a number of readings, both in the Vancouver area and in the Cranbrook area. Author signings, those sorts of things. Again, I've had some reviews. And then, just because I like to do this, I've been going to various bookstores and just volunteering to sign the copies of the books they have on their shelves.
Sure.
I usually find this helps them get into a better spot in the bookstore.
Good. And thank you for doing an interview with Talking Kootenay Books.
Oh, thank you.
Gives us
Thank
a little bit more exposure there as well. So I'm just wondering, as you deal with a publisher, you said it's out of Atlantic Canada, how closely do they work with you on not only developing the book but also promoting the book, or is that pretty much left up to you?
No, they were, Goose Lane has just been a great publisher. Bethany Gibson, my editor there, fantastic editor, and really helped produce just a solid manuscript I was happy with. Brilliant, astute editor. And then the promotion, they have a promotions team there, and they've been promoting me to writers' festivals and other events, both online and locally.
Okay.
So they've been very helpful. Yeah, I'm very fond of them.
Okay, good. So a good relationship that you've built there.
Yeah.
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 Will you work with them in the future, do you believe?
If I can, I hope to. They plan to reissue The Secret History of My Hometown next year, which is very fortunate. I sent Bethany a copy just by way of thanking her for her help. And they were just in love with the stories and decided that they wanted to reissue it.
Okay.
So that should be coming out next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can look forward to your future writings as well, and that reprint of your Cranbrook stories as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
good.
put Cranbrook on the map.
Well, keep up the good work. We appreciate it. So thank you, Andrew. We really appreciate you being a guest on Talking Kootenay Books, and you always bring an insight that I think not only talks about your books, but also sort of an inspiration to other writers as well, because as you know, it's an idea business, and a diverse place where all those ideas come from, but you're able to put that together and build a story around it. So congratulations. Thank you again for being our guest.
Well, and thank you so much for having me, Keith. It's been great.
This is Talking Kootenay Books, and my name is Keith Powell.